Hello, and welcome back. This video is about rebinding input actions to new keys. And a special thanks to all my supporters. Thank you for helping me help others. We're starting with a fresh Unreal Engine 5.6 third-person blueprint project named Rebind. And the first thing we want to do is go into our project settings. We're going to Engine, Enhanced Input. In the User Settings section, we need to enable user settings. If you don't enable this, when you try to get the user settings from the enhanced input component or subsystem, it'll return none. So we can leave these as default. You can override some of these. So with that done, we're going to go into input. Two main things we're working with here are the input mapping context, and then in actions, we have individual actions. For jump, if we want to set jump to be mappable, we have a player mappable key settings down here. We can just change this to this value, and that will make these options available. If we go ahead and hit save, you'll see that it complains that the player mappable key settings must have a valid name. So we just clear this. We go in here, we have name and display name being the most important. So we're going to set it to jump, and the display name is also just jump. So with that done, we could set up move, but since move is much more complicated with WSAD or other controls, we're going to set that in the input mapping context itself. So in here we have our IA move, and we have WSAD and some others. We're going to ignore the others for now. We're going to open all these up, and we have the player mappable key settings here, but you can see it's grayed out. To make that not grayed out, you can choose one of these two other settings, and for what we're doing, we want to override it. And then we can set this to that as well, which will give us access to the name and player name, or display name. So for this, we're just going to do move forward and display name of move forward with a space. And we'll do the same with the other three. For S, we'll use move backward. Move left, and move right. And with that set up, we can go into our third-person blueprint. Actually, before I do that, I need to make a new folder. This is UI. In here, I'm just going to make a new user interface blueprint. We'll call this WBP Rebind. And now in our third-person character, we're just going to go up to the top here, throw in a begin play. And we're just going to create a widget. Obviously, this will be our rebind. And then we're just going to add that to viewport. And then also get our player controller and set our input mode to game and UI so that we can also set show mouse cursor to true. Now I'm doing this the quick and dirty way. I'm just creating the widget, throwing the viewport. You probably want to have much more complicated options or settings functionality, but for that's all we need. So all that's going to do is add the widget to the viewport. What the widget's going to have is it's going to be a vertical box of slots. So I'm going to create another user interface widget blueprint. We'll call this WBP Input Slot. And in here, I'm going to add a horizontal box. Again, this will be added to a vertical box. So inside that horizontal box, we're just going to put a text and a button. And then on the button, we'll just have some text. So for both of the text and button, I'm just going to make them fill size. This value here is just relative. It doesn't need to add up to 1 or anything like that. So I'm just going to set one of them to 7 and then the other one to 3. So the button doesn't take up much room. We want all of these to be variables, so both text blocks we can set to variable. For this main text, I'm just going to call it text block. And for this other one, I'm going to call it button text block. And then for the button, which is already by default a variable, we're just going to call it button. And then in the graph, I also want to add two variables. One will just be the key mapping name. It's just going to get set and then saved for use in the Rebind widget. And for this, we want it to be instance editable and expose on spawn. And then the other one will just be the WBP Rebind, which is effectively the parent in this case. We can just call it directly, and we'll just set that, of course, to type of WBP Rebind. And similarly, we want it exposed on spawn and instance editable. Lastly, though, we're not going to set it up quite yet. For the button, we want the onClicked event. That's going to be calling a function in here. And we'll set that up in a sec. So in our Rebind widget, we have our vertical box, which I'm going to create or set as a variable. I'm just going to call it vbox. And that's just going to be filled with the slots. So in our graph, we can add a function. Call this add input rows. It's just going to be called from construct. And in here, we're going to get the owning player. The owning player is the player controller. From that, we can get the enhanced input local player subsystem. And then from that, we can call get enhanced input user settings. So if you had not set the project setting value to true, this would just return none. From this, we're going to call get active key profile. And from that, we're calling get player mapping rows. So as you can see by the symbol here, it's a map and, map. So we want to get the keys. And then we can iterate through that with for each loop. So this is just going to give us this set of keys in the order that Unreal decides. If you wanted to order this better, you'd probably want to have a separate array or whatnot of the key names, and then you could access them directly that way. For us, though, all we're doing here is we're just, for each of the names, we're going to create a widget. This will be the input slot. And we're sending along that name, as well as a reference to self. For each of these widgets we created, I'm going to add a sequence. Oops. And for the first bit, I'm just going to be getting our vbox, calling add child, and sending along this new widget. The other thing we want to do with this widget is we want to get the text box and call set text. So I'm just going to grab the other one here. This is get button text block. Similarly, we'll call set text. So the first text block is the display name of the key. So to get that, we go all the way back here. We have our get active key profile. We can call find key mapping. And we have an in args here. So this is a structure. So you can drag that out and click on make map player key args. So this is a big scary make structure window, but all we actually need is the mapping name and the slot. So as you can see, it shows here 7 different slots. This would be in a game when you have generally 2 different key mappings you can set to an input. So we're just going to, for this video, set it to first. This mapping name is the same that's up here. And then we can close this so it doesn't take up so much room. And what we're getting from here is our key mapping, which is of course another structure. And then we can just break this to get all the values. And in this case, all we care about is the display name. So the display name is what's getting set on the left side of the input slot. And then I misspoke because we want display name here, but we also want the key, current key. Kind of hard to read with this stuff in the way. Oops. The current key here. So when you drag this out, it doesn't give you any, it doesn't give you a hint. If you try to drag it to a text or string field, the text will work, the string will not. So if you had like a print, if you drag a key structure into a string, it's just going to give you an error, or it's going to just pop up this window, so not very useful. But what it is get key display name, and this is giving you the localized version. So you do not want to ever use this in a compare to get some info, or to get the name of the key or whatnot. But for just displaying the text, this is fine. We can pop this back up so it looks a little better. And that's what this part looks like. All right, so if you were going to go and play this now, you would see that it does nothing. If we put a breakpoint on keys here, if we just hit play, you'll see that it says the number of map keys that were returned is 0. The reason why that is because in the third person character, down where we call, well, the template calls add mapping context, there is an options section down here. This is taking a structure. So I'm not going to move everything around, but basically the structure you can call or click make. And you may want to do it on the mapping context up here if you need it for that. But notify user settings needs to be checked here. So with that checked, and we still have our breakpoint here, if we hit play, you can see that it now says num equals 5. I'll just continue with that, and you can see it's just adding the widget to the blue port. Again, just for this video, you'd want to make this look much nicer. And then we have our buttons over here with the values that have been set in the input mapping context and the actions themselves. To finish up what we need to do, we go back into our Rebind. We're going to add a function. This will be on the key button or the input button when it's pressed. In here, we want a parameter. This will just be the input slot, which is type WBP input slot. And in here, we're just saving this to a variable, which we can call input slot or active input slot. We also want another function. We'll just call this Rebind Key. That is going to take a key. So this is a structure. We'll just type key here, and then we just call this key. And the way this flow will work is that in our input slot, when the button is clicked, we can then call the onKey button function, send along a reference to self. And then we want to put it into a state where we're effectively listening for any key to be pressed. Enhanced input hasn't really changed the way that works. There may be a way to finagle how it works, but the way that enhanced input works is typically you have an input action and you bind it to some functionality. So instead, we're just going to use the old way back in, not our designer, in our event graph. And I'm just doing this in the widget. We can then call AnyKey. So this is an event that's called when any effectively raw key input comes in. So in this case, we're only listening when our active input slot is valid. And we're calling Rebind Key and sending along this key. So when it's not valid, we don't care. When rebound key is called, then we want to then set our active input slot back to null. So then what are we doing with that info in Rebind key? We're again getting our owning player. Owning player controller. We're getting the enhanced input local player subsystem again. We're calling get enhanced input user settings. And with that, we have a call to map player key. Again, we have this in args, which we can call make map player key args. So not surprisingly, the key that we're sending in here is this value. We again want the slot set to first. You can use this value to set multiple slots. And then the mapping name itself, we're getting from our active input slot, which we now know is valid. So we're getting our key mapping name that was set when we first created that input slot. And then we can close this up so it looks a little better. Oops. Now that new key value has been mapped to that slot, but we want to be able to see it as well. So for that, we want to get our active input slot again, control drag that out. We're getting our button text block, setting the text on that. Oops. And the text in here, we can just get the key that is sent into the function, which again is variables at the bottom. And we're getting the display name. So that will work as is. I'll show you what that looks like. So go in here, we have our settings. If I want to set the spacebar to say F, now if I mash the spacebar, nothing's happening, hit F, good to go. And then you can set the other values similarly, hit that to I and this one to K. So now WSAD only works for the A and D part, and then I have the IKJ or IJKL only works for the forward and back part. So we can still make it spin, but it's much more complicated. So this works as is. There's a few things that are important. First is that we have our nice settings here, and now they're gone. So we obviously need to save them somehow. How do we do that? Simply from our get enhanced input user settings here, we can call save. You have async and synchronized or synchronous save settings. We'll just use save for here. And we just want to call that after it's been done. So that will set our savings, or save our settings rather. So all good. We change our space bar back to F. Space does nothing. F jumps. We restart. You can see that that's saved. We hit F. All good. Space does nothing. Now, the only other problem though is that this is some UI, and again, your flow may be a little different, but if you want to do this similarly, you're going to be clicking the button and then we hit space. Since this button now has focus, when you hit space, space specifically, I think enter also, yep, enter works similarly. You won't be able to get those from the AnyKey event. So instead, what we need to do is we need to remove focus when we click on a button. So we can do that very easily by just going into our on key button. We're just going to call, not from there, set keyboard focus. And since we're not actually sending anything here, the one caveat is if we go in, we do that, and then we stop, you'll see this pop up. It's saying effectively that our Rebind widget is not focusable. So we can just set that to focusable and that will be fine. So that's back in the designer under here and is focusable. So with that set now, we can go back in, we do that, we hit space, and we're back to using space for jump, as was intended. So that's a small introduction on how to rebind keys to get you started. One thing you might want to do in your own projects is to make sure that you can't use the same key for multiple actions. But thanks for watching. If you liked the video and would like to see more, you know what to do. And if you would like to support this channel, watch these videos 2 weeks early, or just want to download the project files, You can do so through my Patreon linked below.